Well, welcome to the March 27th Informational. We have a couple of items on our agenda. First, though, we're going to have a report for Councilor Erickson, from Councilor Erickson on the Public Services Committee.
Thank you. Public Services met last week. We had our focus really was on public safety and the report that was shared a couple of months ago from Chief Burns. We also had Attorney General Marty Jackley talking about it as a statewide issue. We talked a lot of the focus was on drugs and the increase of crime based on drug really activity. Some of the areas went down for statistics, but we did focus the majority of our time on that particular issue from both Chief Burns as well as Marty Jackley. Sheriff Milstead did address the council as well. We took public input. We had questions from additional councilors that were not on the committee. It went a pretty good amount of time and was a really hearty discussion. So I thank everyone for their participation on that. It's certainly an issue that we're going to need to get serious about. Carrie Benz also did provide some input from Minnehaha County Human Services in regards to the triage center and those conversations that have been taking place with that. So that was our conversation in a nutshell. Like I said, it's probably a good over an hour discussion with questions and public input. So it is listed online if you would like to watch the replay.
And I failed to mention that was from the Public Services Committee meeting, which met on March 13th. Okay, open discussion. City Council open discussion. Any items for discussion this afternoon? Okay, Councilor Staley.
Well, I just wanted to state after that recent drowning we had at Falls Park, I know there's been a lot of conversation about safety and anything that we can do within our community to make that area safer and prevent future catastrophes happening at the falls. So that discussion is happening, and then in light of what we heard yesterday after the Argus leader had asked for the safety report to be revealed or given to the public, I've had some conversations with councilors, and Councilor Pat Starr and I are bringing forth a resolution next week asking for that information to be made public. And I have, you all have a copy of that, as well as it's available for the public if you'd like to see this. And I know Councilor Starr would agree with this, we're open to hearing from our fellow councilors, we're open to hearing from the public about this, but as it is now, this will be showing up on the next meeting. The agenda form has been signed. So I just wanted to state that, and yes.
And thank you for the copy as well.
You're welcome.
Any other items? Councilor Erickson.
Just if we can just discuss that a little bit. I think that we all share a lot of frustration with that. I'm curious if this has been provided to anybody in the administration for their feedback, or just, hey, can we have this? I know that there has been requests from, I think, several asking for it, and we have not received anything. Let me be very clear, no person on the City Council has received this, and so I would be curious if it can just be made public without having to do the resolution. Otherwise, this would be the next necessary step to do that.
And if the report does become available, then of course this would
we'll just not do it.
That's right, that wouldn't happen. But let me just say publicly for myself, especially in this last year, we have had instances of confidential settlements, of we are not able to know what policies are happening. We are not told about proposals. We can't be told who investors are in projects that we're partnering with tax dollars. And to me, I couldn't believe this actually happened yesterday, because the public is saying to me, and I think to many of us, that this isn't acceptable. And just a statement, I'm so hopeful that after April 10th, we are going to have a new spirit of openness and transparency and collaboration happening within our entity, and also between us and the community and the mayor's office. So I'm grateful we can have this discussion, and hopefully we won't have to even address this resolution because we'll get that information.
And thank you for, if I may,
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Counselor.
Thank you for providing this in advance so that we can see it and it is available for the public to see it. I think that speaks in the name of transparency as well. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm also hopeful that maybe it's something that can be done in advance or additional explanation with it as well. So thank you for that.
And if I could say one more thing.
Okay.
Are you through, Counselor Erickson?
Yes.
Okay, can we, did Counselor Neisert, and then we can come back?
Is that okay? I just want to say that this morning I did urge the administration to release the document. I haven't heard a response yet. I found it very troublesome as well. I applaud the effort of the two counselors here. I think it's a good thing. I hope that it becomes a voluntary thing and we don't have to go to that point, but if we have to, we have to. And it is another unfortunately disappointing episode, and I'd like to say I'm surprised, but I really am not. Thanks.
Okay, Counselor Staley.
And moving forward, to me, when that safety, they said we had a safety report and it said they shouldn't have any extra barriers or that the signage was adequate. I was thinking to myself, well, here's a starting point. Maybe we need to have bigger signage and something that addresses the foam, the area where these incidences have happened, maybe some type of a temporary fencing for the spring, or maybe even have something more permanent, just as far as some bars like they have, the railings that they have. But then when we're told that we can't see the report, how do we know where we're starting from? It's like an invisible piece of information that we really can't get a hold on. So again, I think moving forward, this body has a right to say we are going to demand that these things be given to us in their original form, not like what happened with the Event Center report where we got the draft report in and we had to wait for a week before we got to see it. So that's something I think we can do moving forward, and that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the things where I started in the process after having to learn about this in the media, I did send an email this morning to the Public Assurance Alliance and their executive director, Mr. Fifley, requesting a copy of the safety audit for Falls Park. I also suggested that it would be good for any other information that they have for us that they could share with us to let us know exactly what was discovered and whether there was actually an independent safety audit or not, and who conducted it and who was involved. And it's disappointing that we learn these things through the media, but at the same time, that's the media's job sometimes to trust but verify and ask the questions of where the information is. I hope the report's not in a draft form at this point, that we wouldn't be able to get it, but it is what it is. And so we did start, or at least I started from the point of view of asking the people who say it's their report and their information to request a copy. But timing-wise, following up with what you said, Councilor Erickson, was that we did, or at least I requested a copy, and I copied the entire council, at least on the email, and members of the administration, that we were interested in the information. And I think it's something that maybe a full informational to take us through the process of where they were at, and then some follow-up maybe by the Public Services or the Land Use Committee, wherever the best venue is, so to move forward with that.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Okay, any other items for open discussion? All right, seeing none, then we're going to move on to our first presentation, which is preparing our wastewater system for the future. And Director Mark Cotter is going to present, as well as Trent Lubers, our utility manager, operations administrator, too. So welcome, Director Cotter.
Thank you, Council Chair and Council members. Thank you for having us. We've got a full team here today that will make the appropriate introductions as we get started. Thanks for getting us on your agenda. This team has been working on this wastewater master plan for the last 2 years to really take a thoughtful look at the collection and treatment system to serve not only Sioux Falls, but the regional communities that choose to come to and pump into the system. The study looked at a 10-year, a 20-year, a 50-year, and a 100-year increment going forward to really start to identify what are some of those near-term improvements that need to be made, but also when you look at 50 years and 100 years at our current absorption rate, where are some of those real critical infrastructure improvements that are needed to make sure that we can serve multiple generations to come. This presentation will focus on that 20-year horizon so you can have a good understanding of what this may mean to the growth and development of Sioux Falls. I think we all feel confident we've got a good, reliable collection and treatment system today. The City Council and other past councils have supported incremental rate increases to make sure that we can right-size the funding for this utility so we can ultimately invest in it at the rate that it should. We'll show you some of those investments that have happened over the course of the last 10 years, and we still enjoy some of the most affordable rates of wastewater service in the region. All right, let's get started. So the presentation agenda will focus on the history of reliable service, some factors about the current treatment facility. We'll look into the collection system, the master planning process, the team that was involved, the key drivers. There's 3 key drivers of this master plan, which is aging infrastructure, additional capacity, and then ultimately future regulations. We'll look at the current facility, what a conceptual future facility will look like, master plan recommendations, and really next steps into 2018. There'll be several presentations that are yet to come in the years to come. You won't be asked to make any decisions today. This is all informational only, really to roll up the last 2 years of work. All right, so that history of reliable service. We have a strong history of reliable service over the last 35 years. The city has constructed, maintained, and updated the wastewater collection system and the water reclamation facility that transports and treats our wastewater safely and effectively in a way that keeps our rates very affordable. First of all, in the water reclamation facility, that's the term we call the treatment facility. Really over the last 2 decades, there's been improvements that have been made to the treatment, disinfection, storage, filtration, and capacity of that system. And then also for you and for attendees today and into the future, we do have a leave behind, a 2-page brochure that kind of highlights the key points of this presentation. Inside the first cover really highlights what those key improvements that have been at the treatment facility over the last 2 decades. The collection system, we really took more of a targeted focus on what's been done in the last 10 years. A substantial amount of work has been done to reinvest into the trunk sewers of Sioux Falls. We all remember the collapse that happened in 2010 that accelerated some of those final steps of the true trunks of the tree, if you will, that carry the wastewater from those neighborhoods and businesses ultimately to the treatment system. The result of that has been in the last 10 years we've invested over $131 million into this wastewater system. This utility at its current funding level pays off just over $10 million of debt annually. And we traditionally only take out 10-year loans. And so now the fact that we've been on this train for over 12 years, really now we're starting to see those loans get paid off, and then as we take on new, it's starting to have a very smoothing effect to our customers' rates. All right, we wanted to just give you a perspective of what the size of the city was when the treatment plant was moved from down near the street campus to its current location in the extreme northeast area of the city. This is the footprint of the city in 1984. The first phases of the current treatment plant went online in about 1982. You know, if you look at the boundaries, we stretched west to about Sertoma Avenue, north just above I-90. Highway 11 was our east limit, and 57th Street was our south limit. We've certainly grown since then. Our population back in 1984 was 88,000 people. and we had a mature city size of about 43 square miles. All right, now fast forward to 2017, our population has grown to 183,200 people. We've nearly doubled in size. Now we're at a size of 78 square miles. This increase in population has resulted in an additional 95,200 people in the last nearly 35 years. So when you overlay those two on top of each other and recognize the additional population, not only in the core from more sustainable development, but also in the new development areas on the fringes of the city, really the almost all the way around the entire city. Sioux Falls has a proud history of managed growth over this 35-year period of time, and studies like this really lay the foundation for growth and development of the city. All right, let's spend some time and talk about the current regional treatment facility. So I think it goes without saying that where the leaders did 35 years ago to place that current facility was very visionary. They looked for a large piece of land downstream of our growth and development area, and also bought a large enough piece of land not only to serve them then, but well into the future. The current plant footprint sits on about 70 acres, but the land owned by the city is about 270 acres. The other area that was the other kind of key factor, if you've been out on the campus, I know many of you have, is that it was built on a hillside. So as you take advantage of gravity, as that goes from one treatment process to the next, it minimizes the amount of pumping that's needed. It's a very efficient plant from an electrical demand standpoint, and has really been a robust plant from the very beginning. The point that we made there with the asterisks, that when this plant was constructed, it was constructed with 75% federal grant funds. With the Clean Water Act of the early 70s, there was construction grant dollars that City of Sioux Falls took advantage of that funded 75% of this plant, really modernized wastewater plants all across the country. Those construction grants are not available to that level anymore, and so now our current user base has to really fund the aging infrastructure rehabilitation needs, the hydraulic capacity needs of the future, and then ultimately if there's any future regulations we need to account for. I think that's a very important point for us to sort of recognize that the core of our city, when that treatment plant was moved from near the street campus to its current location, 75% of those costs were ultimately funded by the federal government. The next tile really speaks to its current rated capacity, 21 million gallons a day. There's a good story about the current rated capacity. When the plant was originally built and rated, it was rated for 13.5 million gallons per day. After the teams have operated this plant for several decades, that they knew that it was really had the ability to treat more wastewater than what it was rated for. So we hired an expert team, added a number of sampling ports downstream of each treatment process, really categorized all that data, submitted a document to the state of South Dakota, and ultimately to really prove out that it can annually and daily treat more than it was currently rated for. That study cost about $200,000, proved out that it should be rated at 21 million gallons a day. The state accepted it, and that's really what got us that additional 7.5 million gallons of wastewater treatment capacity without putting any more bricks and mortar in the ground. So we've been able to stretch the design life of this plant with some really good treatment processes, some good maintenance that has maximized the life of these plants, and ultimately our partners at the state. The next tile just shares with you on our average daily flow for 2017 was 17.2 million gallons a day, and so our treatment plant is currently at 82% capacity. There's a dedicated operations team that runs this plant 24/7, also a dedicated maintenance team that keeps this plant running with redundant features to make sure we can deliver reliable wastewater service. All right, let's take a look at the collection system and some of those aspects. So sanitary sewer leads development. So as you look at the differences between 1984 and 2017, the first utility that actually opens up land is sanitary sewer. So we've constantly had to be working with the planning team, Mike and Jeff and his team, on what's the amount of land supply that's available for development, and then also constantly asking the development industry, where are you at, what's the market, where do they expect to go. There's always one-on-one meetings with those partners every year to make sure that we stay in track with where those things are going. When you consider the capital investment that's in our current capital plan to open up Basin 15, we've got an estimated 11-year supply of current developable land for the city to mature. And that's always an iterative process as we watch and see land mature to make sure that we're always staying out in front and having a good demand. You look at some of the tiles on the right-hand side, there's 25 major sanitary sewer basins. Those are essentially, if rain falls into an area, where would that ultimately fall to a main trunk sewer? There's 25 of those as it's been divided up around town to efficiently move wastewater. There's 846 miles of sanitary sewer pipe. There's just under 16,000 manholes, and there's 22 city-owned and operated lift stations. There's a dedicated team that proactively manages the collection system to make sure that we deliver reliable service to our customers every day. The investments that we talked about earlier in the last 10 years that approached $130 million, the majority of those investments have gone into the collection system. As Mark Perry would tell you, that in many cases our collection system, at least the trunk sewer systems, would be the envy of many towns with the amount of investment that's been made. Many of you stood inside the 72-inch sanitary sewer outfall pipe. That was really that's the true backbone of the system that was reconstructed in the last 2 years and put into operation last year. All right. Let's talk about the master planning process. Really, why are we here? It's best practice to, as your plant and or collection system reaches 75% capacity, you really should be designing what those improvements need to be. We started this process about 2 years ago. Our current plan is at 82% capacity, so we know that we should be in this design stage, and that's exactly where we're at. Another best practice is once your plant actually hits 90% capacity, you should be under construction because you need to have that appropriate time. Many of these assets take multiple years to construct and then put online. The three main drivers, as we talked about before, really the aging infrastructure. This is a very highly corrosive. The wastewater never stops. It runs 24 hours a day, so we've got to address aging infrastructure. We know the growth and development that's happening not only in Sioux Falls but in the region. It's exciting. We've got to be here to take advantage of that, but also we've got to plan for it with one of the basic utilities, which is wastewater. And then also, you'll see in one of the future slides that the majority of the states around us have already either adopted more stricter regulations or will, and so we're planning for that at the end of our 20-year planning horizon. You should know that your wastewater treatment and collection system has a book value of about $380 million. It's important that we hire the right experts, get the right independent thinkers in the room to make sure that we're maximizing every one of those assets so we can continue to serve our customer base. When you look at the 24-month planning process, some of the activities that go into that is we thoughtfully look at population projections. Those drive wastewater flows, not only in the city of Sioux Falls, but some of these neighboring communities, our regional partners. Condition assessments are conducted. That's a final clarifier in front of you. On the slide, condition assessments of all the assets are looked at and then rated. and then identified for short-term, medium-term, long-term improvements, modeled different flow predictions and different treatment technologies to ultimately inform the master plan. One of the things that we do when we have to make a big decision is often we'll bring in another firm. In this case, we had a national firm do the master plan, and we also brought in a second firm as a peer review to have a thoughtful discussion on those assumptions, those drivers, and ultimately the choices that we had to make, and feel confident in the results of this master plan. All right, I want to give you a perspective of who's involved. Some of these key people are here today. If you guys would just raise your hand as we introduce you. Mark Perry is the superintendent at the wastewater plant, has that team of 4 supervisors. Paul Ferris is here. He runs the collection team. Mark Herholzer is here. He runs the operations team. Phil Greenwood is here. He's the residual coordinator. Jeff Workenthien runs the maintenance team. He's not able to be here today. Jesse Nyans is he's on the environmental team, works directly with the industrial wastewater customers, and also writes some of our key reports to make sure that we are on compliance, beyond compliance for our state and federal regulators. Ryan Johnson's here. He's our principal engineer. Ryan works with both the collections and the treatment teams to make sure that those projects get prioritized and ultimately put in the capital plan that we bring before you. Ryan's a principal engineer that has a key part in that. Trent Lubers is the utility operations manager over all utilities. You guys know Trent well. Jeff Schmidt and Mike Cooper, they are truly our planning partners as we're looking at these population projections, available land that's we need to have for development in this region. Deborah Gaikowski is our project manager. Dean Borkart's our business operations manager, works with our rate models. Heather Hitterdahl works with us on communication, and we've just recently brought in Shannon Verheyes, the assistant city engineer, to really help us formulate what this project team will be like as we take these projects from paper to construction. Okay. We've got the HDR team. HDR is a national firm. They've been in business for over 100 years. They've got a large team that's located right here in Sioux Falls. Dan Graber is here. Bill Moran is here, as well as Delron Peters. Very talented team that one of the key factors, HDR was one of the original design teams that designed the original plant, have a lot of knowledge, have done a number of projects over time, and really brings a wealth of knowledge from experts across the country that can help guide us as we plan these key investments going forward. The Carollo engineering team, they were our peer review team. We brought in people out of Kansas City and out of San Diego to really discuss the key drivers of the plan and the assumptions and ultimately the choices. They're a firm that all they focus on is water and wastewater. They've been in business for over 80 years. Really a top-notch team. Typically, when we bring in a peer review team, it only costs us about 5 to 7% of the original design fee to ultimately get that type of advice. Our total effort on this project with HDR and Carollo Engineers was about $850,000 that we've worked through over the last 2 years. And then our regulating team, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, not only for helping us with treatment technologies, but they're also our partner to secure low-interest loans to smooth out the impacts to our customers' rates. All right, let's talk a little bit about the drivers of the master plan. We've talked about that aging infrastructure. You know, we've got a first tile there that says the facility is about 10 years past its original design life. And there's a couple of key factors that really drove that. We have a really good maintenance team that maximizes these assets to their full life. We also talked about that re-rate that we were able to accomplish in 2009 to re-rate the facility from 13.5 million gallons a day up to 21 million gallons a day to be able to achieve an additional 7.5 million gallons of capacity with about a $200,000 study. It was some of the best money spent. One of the items that doesn't get talked about much is water conservation. And this city had great vision about 15 years ago with some of the water constraints that we had, is they started to invest in water conservation to really change out some of those high flow toilets, change out some of those washing machines that would use 50 gallons. Now the high energy ones, high efficiency ones take 12 to 15 gallons. There's a number of strategies we do with irrigation. But just to give you some perspective on what that investment has made, not only to our water customers, but to our wastewater customers. We looked at the stats today. To date, in the last 15 years, we've spent about $3.3 million on water conservation. We've changed out just over 16,000 toilets, 17,000 washers. It has resulted in a savings today of 3.8 million gallons per day. That's every day. And the program still exists, and we're still taking advantage of working with people to change out their high flow toilets, really anything that was installed before 1992. But when you factor that forward, 3.8 million gallons a day, that's another stretch that's allowed us to stretch out this day longer, because there was good vision on that council to invest in water conservation. It not only reduces our customers' bills because they don't have to buy all that additional water, and then they don't have to flush it down the toilet to send it to the wastewater plant, and it affects that side of the bill as well. When you do the math of 3.8 million gallons per day times 365 days, that's almost 1.4 billion gallons of water a year we don't have to harvest, treat, and distribute, and it's also that same amount of water we don't have to send through the wastewater plant and then discharge to the environment. So I think it's always good to highlight the visionary policies that get put in place. Some of those get started fairly small when they begin, but ultimately they have a compounding effect that got us to today. All right, let's talk about really the population projections and those flow projections. So when we started the study back in 2016 and benchmarked that population, and then not only capturing what's happening in Sioux Falls, but in the region, and if you have a cumulative growth effect of about 2.6%, you'll have an increase in population by 2036 of almost 70% for Sioux Falls and the region. And so when we start to plan for this wastewater upgrade, this will be an additional 120,000 people that will be in our metro area that we've got to be positioned for providing wastewater services. All right, growing our customer base, after we start to look at what those population projections are, then we look at what our historical maturity rates are, also work with our potential regional customers, and then we have a tier map that you guys have seen, especially through Shape Sioux Falls and some of those planning efforts that really provide guidance on what's available today or will be available in the next 5 years, and then where do we expect to be going in 10 years, 15 years. Really what we've captured here is normally we've seen a Tier 1, 2, and 3, most of which we have today is in Tier 1, and we've got a substantial supply of development land right now that we think that we've just really brought together both Tier 1 and Tier 2, and so we just are really predicting when we think we'll be into Tier 3, which Tier 3 is really in that 15 to 25 year window. Okay. All right, future regulations. Future regulations, we've been working closely with our regulators on trying to get an understanding when we expect to have future regulations or tighter regulations put in our permit. Water quality impacts everyone in our region all the way down to the Gulf, and that's why you'll see on the next page of how many other states have already enacted these additional, more stricter regulations really to make the wastewater cleaner. Everything that we've planned for really in the next 10 to 15 years will be able to be added on to address these future regulations as they come down from EPA through the state. This map gives you that perspective of the blue states essentially are the states that have some nutrient removal in their plan by 2019. The crosshatched states, which are getting closer to us, they are planning it. They just haven't set an actual date. That's why when we went out to Pierre and talked to the Secretary Perner and asked if we lay out a plan and ultimately address first our aging infrastructure next to our hydraulic capacity needs to expand our system. If we had our additional treatment capacity online by the end of our 20-year planning period, would that be sufficient? And initially we've got his support so we can stretch out those projects. So from what that means to our customer and our customers' rates is we can focus on what needs to be done. Anytime you can put off a wastewater project, even a year, allows one less obligation for our customers to have to pay for, and that's what we try to do with as we look at all of our projects that are in front of us. All right, now let's just frame up and give you a picture of what the current plant looks like. And as you look at the current plant, this is where it would sit today. Again, we've made a number of improvements to rehabilitate some aspects of this plant over the last 2 decades. Now as you start to look at the right-hand side of this image, this plant today is rated at 21 million gallons per day. It has a peak max of 35 million gallons per day. And I can toggle back to. Now when you look at what's needed for the additional liquid treatment and the future regulations, as you go more to the top of the hill, there'll be additional preliminary treatment, primary treatment, liquid treatment, final clarifiers, and then ultimately nutrient removal. Takes our, and again, this is just a conceptual image. As we get into design, this will certainly get refined, but this would increase the capacity of this plant from 21 up to 30.1 million gallons a day, and then with some strategic equalization placed here and down at the street division landscape, that'll increase our peak max up to 57 million gallons per day. All right, we talked about logically we want to lay out a plan that obviously we've got to keep this plant running while we make the respective improvements, so you'll never see us bring forward a plan that says we should do all this work at once. And so we have a plan laid out that would ultimately begin design this year and into the coming years, and then start to ultimately deliver these projects for treatment renovations at the liquid treatment side, biosolids handling, actually starting to dry our biosolids as opposed to putting them in the lagoons. That'll allow us to free up that lagoon space for equalization so we can shave the peaks off of what's coming to the plant. And then ultimately on the other side, 1D, rehab the preliminary and primary treatment. We've got some bottlenecks in those aspects. They also are getting tired and need investment. New liquid treatment would almost be a mirror image to our current, and some of the things that you'll see in the master plan is those costs are fully loaded, but we expect to build some of those aspects in phases. So again, we can smooth out our customers' rate impacts. And then new disinfection so we can handle the additional flows. We hope to accomplish that and or go to bid by 2025 for all that work. Okay. Then recommended phase 2, and again, this will be an iterative process. We'll probably update the master plan to make sure that population projections are remaining the same, that treatment technologies haven't changed, that we don't need to look at something new, but ultimately, based on what we know today, we expect that by 2036 we'll have to have phase 2 online, and so there'll be a design period and a construction period to deliver new primary treatment, new nutrient removal, and new filtration. All right, next steps, 2018 we expect to start preliminary design, and then we'll identify a logical construction phasing, and again this we'll be talking to you and sharing with you as we learn what those logical construction phasing programs look like, and then we can really determine that 20-year investment. You know, anytime you're at a master plan stage, you're at a very high contingency amount, but ultimately we want to be able to inform the rate model and give our customers some idea of what future rates will be. That's what we have for you today, and again, we're here. We've got our team here to answer questions if you have them, and also want to make sure that people don't leave without taking the the two-page handout that really tries to capture the key points of what the master plan drivers are, the investments that have been made, and the key aspects that will have to be made going forward.
Okay, very good, Director.
Thank you.
And by the way, welcome everybody that took time out of your day to come to the meeting. Thank you very much. Questions? Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Slide 13, the one that talks about the growing customer base and the potential additional regional customers. I just have a question on that, and then one other question. My question is how does those regional customers impact Sioux Falls? Sometimes I think that there could be some misinformation as far as why are we taking everybody else's waste here if we can't manage our own, which kind of a loaded question. I think I know the answer to. I know the answer, but how do we explain that to the public as far as, you know, the impact of these additional customers that we're looking at taking on, and how does that make sense for the city?
Right, it's a good question. So one of the things that we did prior to 2013 is we got our regulators in the room and then all these potential regional customers, and we talked through a number of aspects of what a regional system might look like. And one of the first things we had to figure out is what is the available capacity that we had, and what is every increment of that capacity worth? That was really the foundation, and prior to that, we hadn't had the need to go through the exercise to calculate what the cost of capacity is. In round numbers, that came to a typical single-family house that has about a 3/4 inch meter is about $2,400. Okay, so as you start to look at the size of a water meter and the amount of wastewater that can come, whether it's coming from Brandon has signed a long-term agreement, sends all their wastewater to the city. We're getting very close with the city of T, and we're having good discussions with the city of Harrisburg. So they're evaluating their options. But ultimately, we've calculated what that cost of capacity is. And then just in general, there's a number of fixed costs that we can harness the economy of scale, that if we're all paying those fixed costs, it should stabilize rates for the whole region. So I look at it that it'll be very similar to a program like water conservation, only in a microcosm, that this has to start small as it has, but ultimately wastewater is massively expensive, and if we can collectively work together and find the best solution and do it the most effective, it'll benefit not only Sioux Falls but the regional partners.
Thank you. One more follow-up, if I may, and then I'll defer my last one I have, see if it's not answered or asked, excuse me. So this plan, I mean, water, this is serious business. I mean, it's a big deal. It's heavily regulated. It's a large task to take on, and thank you all for being here. My question is what does this plan mean for the customer rates? How do we plan for that? How do you plan as you move ahead? And what does this mean for customer rates?
Okay. Well, we're still at a master plan level stage, and so those expecting timing of projects and costs are at the conceptual level. But what we've tried to really do is we've tried to group them into what needs to be done in phase 1, what needs to be done in phase 2, and then we've started to run some initial iterations that look at, you know, traditionally we've done 10-year notes to allow those notes to smooth our customer rates, but only take on short-term notes. We've started to look at some options here that may look at some 15 and 20-year notes, because some of these assets, just like the current assets that are in the ground, they've been out there for 35 years, and so we've really thoughtfully said, do they need to be paid off in 10 years? Should we consider 15, knowing that this utility today already pays off over $10 million in debt a year? But some conceptual rates today, we've set rates through 2019 at 6%. So the last 3 rate increases are 6, 6, and 6. Looking forward at a very high-level conceptual stage, we're probably in that area between the next 5 years beyond that, where we'll come off that level and we'll transition into inflationary rates, even with the amount of investment that we've got. So I expect in the next 3 to 4 years that will come off somewhere between that 6 and 4 rate, and then ultimately have more of a smoothing effect on our customers down in that more inflationary rate. Now, if projects come in more competitively that we've seen, that has the ability to pull those numbers down. If they come up, it has the ability to pull those rates up slightly. But again, I think one of the things that's really been really well done as we've worked closely with the council is we've made incremental rates over time. Our customers have been able to adjust for that. We still have some of the lowest, most affordable wastewater rates in the entire region. We're unique as well. We pay these same rates. Most of us live in Sioux Falls, and so we certainly don't want to put any additional rate impact on our customers that need to. So I would say, the future, I think, looks very bright. We've got some transitions that will come off what our current rate is. We expect within 5 years to be down into that inflationary rate based on our current runs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Neitzer.
I have a number of questions, so I'll just do a few at a time. But first, I want to make a couple of comments. First of all, I need to thank my predecessors and city staff, past and present, for having the vision to be proactive about this, because you see so many communities where their infrastructure is falling apart, and it's easy to neglect what you don't see. So I think we're in a really good position, and that's very good. The other thing I wanted to mention was, I really think at some point, if you could do some sort of a presentation for the entire council, probably after we turn over, that kind of goes into the rate modeling again.
Okay.
Because as you know, I did sit down with you and Dean, and it was really, really helpful to kind of see how the rate modeling works, and for the benefit of everybody, it's almost like when you play with the what-if calculators, whether it be like a mortgage pay down or a retirement thing, where you could literally plug in different numbers. And so you had, okay, we know we got to replace all these things over the next 10 or 20 years. So you got those plugged in. You know how much it costs generally for operations every day throughout the year. And so you could literally plug something in and say, well, what if we put in a new basin and we had $10 million, and then you would see that the curve would move, for example, and then maybe the amount of money that we would have in the fund would go below the reserve that we need to have in 5 years, and then you would know, okay, well, we need to increase revenue. So you could see, and it visually made sense that these numbers aren't, you're not just plucking them out of wherever. And especially in previous years from seeing, and I will tell you, before I was on the council, I was very concerned, and I'm always obviously concerned about rates, but to see that it made sense, I think that's really, really important if you can try to, simplify that and really kind of put it out there.
Okay.
Hard numbers. So
okay. We'll do our best.
I'll just ask maybe one question, and then I will just, I'll defer since I just, you mentioned currently at 82% capacity. Are we ever at 100 or more in certain surges?
Yes.
What
that's
do you
why
do?
you have to have those peak. Well, the team has, the ability to, we've got tankage on site. We're building equalization. You'll see a large equalization basin get built down by the street campus this year, in addition to what we already have there. So when we have high flows come through, say, and one of the things that we've seen just with all the investment in the trunk sewers, it's tightening that all those joints up. Some of those sewers that were out there for the last 35 years that were concrete, once that sewer gas got to those joints, ate through those joints, we were getting a lot of water intrusion. So we're starting to tighten up. So we're starting to see a trend of those flows are starting to flatten out, which is good. But essentially, you cut it over to what we call peak shave. So there's 2 equalization basins today down by the street campus. We're going to construct another one this year. In the past, if you know, on the east side of Cliff Avenue, where the lime lagoons, that's a byproduct of treating water. We've had to, Paul Ferris and his crew have had to get out there, put pumps in manholes, and divert water into those lime lagoons for a short time. We call it peak shaving, and you're also doing it to save the downstream infrastructure. That new equalization basin, that'll provide us another 20 million gallons of storage. That'll get constructed this summer. That's going to be a game changer for us. The other item that we'll do at the plant is, we'll show you here, get through some pictures. If you look at those two bodies of water in the upper left, those are where we store our biosolids today that ultimately gets hauled to the farmers' fields, and it's a soil amenity. Those will get converted to equalization basins because we're going to basically start to dry our sludge and make it a Class 1 product. So strategically, you'll start to see us in this master plan place more equalization basin to shave that peak. So ultimately, you don't have to build your wastewater plant for Easter Sunday, if you will. You're building it more to handle those high flows, but ultimately, there are aspects in the plant that Mark Herholzer and the operators, they know how to slow the flow down, if you will, and hold flow for a little bit additional time to make sure we can still meet our permit requirements, but the team gets nervous on those big days.
So just to clarify that for the public, I'm sorry, that,
Yep.
So just to be really clear, essentially an equalization basin would be like a big holding tank where you're
Yes.
holding extra flow
That's right.
while you're taking care of a peak, and then you can
That's right.
bring it through. Okay.
That's
thanks.
Okay. Councilor Staley.
I got a few, and then I'll back off and wait. First of all, Mark, you threw out that $850,000. Was that consultants coming in?
That was consultants coming in for the last 2 years.
$850,000.
That's right. About $800,000 for our primary consultant and about $50,000 for our peer review consultant.
I appreciate, first of all, let me say, since you started raising these rate increases in 2011, I gathered citizens together. We came in, rallied the media, and said, wait a minute, what's happening? And I personally have had my rates increase doubled. And I'm very, very conservative. So I can't imagine what that's doing to a larger family. I think we need to keep affordable living happening and have that at the top of our priority list in Sioux Falls, especially when we have all this prosperity to be able to build event centers and administration buildings. We're doing all sorts of things. Then when we come down to the basics, we're putting on the backs of a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet. So when Councilor Neitzer brings up having you come in and talk about the moving parts, to me, that's appealing. But I also think it's appealing, and I've been saying this since I ran in 2016, I think we need to have a performance audit of your departments. And it's nothing against you, but this comes down to what we heard this fall when we had our municipal league conference about oversight. It's a hard thing to say, and I know you have employees here that work very hard, but right now you are the only person in charge of this department. And we might have the financial statement audit done yearly, but I think before I'm going to ever get on board with raising our rate increases, I want to have an independent firm come to town, and it's going to cost a lot less than $850,000. And I'd like them to look over things and to look at all the moving parts and say, yes, everything is as it should be. Because I think when you have a lot of money to spend, sometimes you spend a lot of money. Okay, not that you're doing that, Mark. Okay, but and you know, this is nothing new. He and I have had this conversation many times. So just for the record, this is where I'm coming from. But I also, and we've talked about this before, but it still seems somewhat odd to me that, okay, we have 88,000 people in 1984, and now we've over doubled that to 183,000 people, but yet I believe that the amount of people we're servicing has not grown that much. Am I correct in that? That the households that we haven't, because it was like 50,000, and that we're not getting more users into the system.
No, those are 50,000 customers.
Right.
And so a typical customer accounts. And so the typical households, 2.4 people, but there is, when you look at our residential and commercial customers, there's about just over 50,000 customers. And so they're serving, just like me, I have a family of 5, but there's one customer there. And so if that makes sense.
So you're,
So
but like
population,
apartments, do we count apartments in that? How are they counted when you talk about residential services? Like they have a toilet, they're flushing their water down the drain, is every apartment, is every unit considered a person?
In that case, there would be one customer there, and so it could be a 24-unit apartment complex with one customer, okay? So there's two different things about population projections, and we know population drives predicted flows that we have to model and make sure we can treat that appropriate flow, but then we have customer, like the Empire Mall would probably be one customer.
Okay.
Okay, and so, but you've got several acres, several stores that ultimately come into that customer base. Does that make sense?
So as we're moving forward with apartments, and we have a lot of apartments happening,
Right.
are they bringing in doubled the income? So I would think 183,000 people versus 88,000. Yes, you're servicing a lot more people, but we're bringing in a lot more revenue as well. Is that right? Is that reflective of?
Sure, it's reflective of they get billed based on their water use, and so then we're ultimately billing them on their wastewater needs. So certainly if it's a 4-plex, an 8-plex, a 96-plex, they're ultimately getting billed appropriately based on their usage. So yes. And it's also, you're starting to see more sustainable development. I would characterize it in Sioux Falls, where you used to not see more than a 2- or 3-story apartment. Now you're starting to see 4 and 5, so you're starting to see, more density, which I think is good for, because sanitary sewer is just one aspect of growth. And then it becomes, you've got to logically plan out your water main extensions, your road extensions. Then you've got to bring in the other public services of parks, fire stations, and so sanitary sewer is just the very beginning of growth, and there's a layered effect on how we ultimately grow and mature a city. And then back just on the audit question, we'd welcome that. We've had a number of operational audits from internal audit, and I know all those are available. Our team prioritizes projects as if it's our dollars, and so we would certainly not object to that.
Well, in a performance audit, I called around a few years ago when I was thinking of having this in the budget. Didn't happen at that time. But there are performance audits where they just come in and they test out to make sure everything is being maximized to the best usage. And when we're dealing with tax dollars, I think that's really our responsibility. So don't take it personally. If this was your own business, I wouldn't care what you're doing. But we're dealing with our people's money here and resources. Okay.
That's good.
Any other questions? Counselor? Yes.
Selberg.
Selberg. Marshall Selberg.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Cotter, for being here, for both you and your team for being here, and all you do for our city on this subject. I always find this fascinating, where I think most people have no idea what all goes into this service and subject. I've been trying to learn this now for a couple of years under your tutelage, and I'm pretty sure I still don't really have a good idea what all goes into this, so I always appreciate the more I learn here. A couple questions that came to mind. You talked about the facilities that were constructed in the 80s. At that time, there was a 75% federal grant, and obviously there's no longer grants of that size available. But let's say currently or in the future as we go forward, what kind of federal assistance would we ever maybe expect to see as we have these projects coming up?
It's my understanding the DNR has about $2 million a year to provide grants to all cities in the state of South Dakota. And so I would double check on that. That's the last I'd heard. And so, we would be competing for everyone across the state, and then you start to see the level of investment that we have to make. It'd be wonderful. The state is very supportive of regionalizing these kind of activities, just like they're very supportive of regionalizing landfills. But we'll certainly pursue those. I don't see them having a significant effect at all on our rates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question was, you talked about a pretty amazing number of 1.4 billion gallons of water saved per year through conservation. Did you, if you broke that down a little bit, how do you do that?
So our team has kept a spreadsheet from the very beginning. I believe it started in 2003. Trent Lubers actually wrote the original plan for water conservation. And it you start to categorize the type of toilet that was changed out to a low flow. So some of those old toilets were 7, 5, 3-gallon toilets. Now everything that was made after 1992, I think, is 1.6. Now you can get some that are down to 0.7, but we don't count that. So you look at that difference, and then you keep track of that over time. So there's been over 16,000 toilets changed out. We rebate on the first toilet $75, and then continue to contribute after that, but it drops down to, I believe, $50 after that. We've really tried to spin up and try to encourage the commercial plumbers to know those programs, so when they go into a 4-plex and 8-plex, that with our program they can almost afford the new toilets, and then the entity is only really paying for the labor. And then what that does, we had an entity in town that has a lot of units, and they showed us their payback after they did 1 month of usage when their water usage dropped, but also their wastewater usage dropped. And so that allows them to have a really good return on investment. On our side, it delays us having to go out and find another water source, and also it delays us having to build more tankage at the wastewater plant. So it's a true win-win.
So all through toilets.
Toilets, and then those washing machines. So the old washing machines that probably most of us grew up with took almost 50 gallons of water, and now they use, in the high efficiency, like 12 to 15 gallons. So you start to add up those two, and that's just really for year-round. Summertime, to shave off some of our water usage, we've gone to odd even, but then we've also started to invest in rain sensors, smart timers. When we went to the odd even approach, some people's timers didn't do that, so we were rebating people a certain amount of money to actually go out and buy the appropriate irrigation timer so they could be a part of the odd even, do it correctly.
All right,
So,
I'm learning. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Selberg. Councilor Starr.
Thank you. Director, I'm a little disappointed today. Usually you have a jar of something to share with us and
Nice.
visual aids today, but I'm willing to live through it during getting close to dinner time. Talk a little bit as the projections, because when we talk about industrial development in the region, large users or of both water and then would be the wastewater. How do we plan for something like that? I know that there's normal industrial growth, but our large customers, whether it's Smithfield and the hospitals and healthcare, how do we factor that into the growth? I can see the population growth, but it seems it'd be a little harder with the industrial side of it.
It is hard, and one of the things that we just don't have very much in the way of industrial customers. Most people don't know that John Morrell invests millions of dollars a year, and they've got their own standalone treatment plant, and they discharge all of their waste at their permit levels or below, and are really good environment stewards to the environment. We've only got a couple of truly industrial customers, and so we let that inform the plan, and it's a very small amount. I want to say it was like 3%, something like that. Do you recall? Yeah. It was, when we start to factor in what are some of those flow drivers and population drivers, we're still expecting that our industrial use is still going to be small. Wind chill that's just moving in into the Foundation Park, very clean industry, generally very clean wastewater. So, landed a really good industry on a large footprint of land that brings in, 75 jobs in that case, but very clean wastewater. So I think we allowed to not over-predict on industrial, and quite honestly, we've gone through so many different iterations of cheese plants and other industries that want to come here. We've toured several, whether it's Jack's Links up in Alpena or if it's the cheese plant in Hull, Iowa, or others. One of the things we're really seeing is you really have to have those industries do pre-treatment. It's just, it's too caustic, it's too strong, and so even if we feel comfortable forecasting forward with that 3% forward in industrial growth, because all the iterations, the team gets wrung out from doing these every time a new industry is considering coming to town. We run all these numbers, and ultimately we go back to them and say, you have to pre-treat down to this. And so it also protects our plant from really taken up a lot of capacity in one industry. Does that help?
Yes, but just kind of as a follow-up then, does that, it's probably less expensive then as well for that industry to pre-treat on their own than it is by the time they would add it to our system.
It is. Yeah, that's the second iteration.
And then the other kind of direction that I wanted to go was with conservation. Are we putting enough into conservation efforts? Are we funding that correctly in the budget? I mean, we're never funding it enough. I get that, but where is that?
You know, I think we still have an opportunity to do more, and our funding is there. Our water system is strong, and so if we had more demand, we would budget accordingly. This last year, in the last 2 years, we really tried to bring the commercial plumbers, Howe and those types in to basically remind them we've got these programs. So when you get pulled into go into a fourplex to change out, maybe there's a toilet that breaks, you know, to remind them that we have a program, but then that may also be an in to go into the other units and say, you know, offer to that building owner that we've got this program, change them all out, come in, get your rebate. That helps us, helps them. And so I do think that we've got more opportunity to conserve more and stretch out our water sources longer and ultimately stretch out our wastewater sources longer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Neitzer?
I do have other questions, but it just made me think of another one. This is a little morbid, but for funeral homes, can they just put whatever into the floor drain, or do they have to be special treatment? You got very caustic chemicals.
Boy, I don't know that answer.
I didn't know if there's any
an
environment. Yeah, okay.
You know,
It's just, you know, with formaldehyde and all these other.
Yeah, they're not considered what we call a significant industrial user, so let us follow up with that.
Okay. In other jurisdictions, in other areas, they make a reference to sewer districts. Now, we have our basins that have to do with ridge lines and topology and all that. Are those the same thing, or do we have anything we would call a district here in Sioux Falls, or do we just not even use that terminology?
Closest one we probably have is Prairie Meadows.
Sure, I mean, yeah, I mean like those rural ones, but I mean, in our system, do we refer to anything as a district, I guess?
No.
No, okay.
We look at our system as one system.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I have heard private people, including, I had a developer that kept referring to our districts, and I think he meant the basins.
I think he meant the
is what he
basins,
meant. Okay,
too.
so that's
Yeah.
just not terminology we use. Do we know, well, I'm sure you know, with all of our open basins, do we have a total number of the amount of cost recovery remaining on them? Because as an example, it might cost, well, it costs $10 million to open up, give or take, like basin 15, and then we do cost recovery.
Right.
And if it doesn't develop very quickly, maybe 10 years from now you still have $8 million left to recover. And so I've been struggling with, developers on the west side that they want basin 15 built. They want more,
Right.
and, which I understand. But then I asked myself, how much infrastructure do we have in the ground that we haven't recaptured? You know, do we have
Right.
$100 million of sewer that hasn't been recaptured? I mean, and how does that affect your decision making at all?
It affects our decision making as we think about opening up new basins, certainly, because that also goes into Mike and Jeff's formula on how much land is today available. And what you may hear from a developer is that they may be out of land, but they have to go over to the other side of town and buy some land, right? I would tell you our two largest sanitary sewer areas, the east side, cost about, rough numbers, about $40 million to open up. And then to open up the northwest side costs about $24 million to open up. And we just looked at this the other day. I hate to quote something, but I believe we've still haven't collected probably 2/3 of that in very conceptual numbers. And so we've got, that's our long-term plan, is going east. And that's why we feel like we've got a good 10 to 15 years worth of supply available, and that's what those cost recoveries are out there for. But all that is managed right to the T. We've got one person that manages all the cost recoveries, and ultimately he's called by title companies constantly on clearing up cost recoveries and things of that nature. So I don't know how many calls Kurt Struck gets in a given week, but that's a very active basis that we tie to our GIS system. So we can ultimately manage the amount of supply, but also the amount of cost recoveries that haven't been paid. Now, some of those areas are likely never going to get paid. They may be an area that ultimately turns into a large stormwater detention area that, maybe in the master planning stage of opening up that basin, we didn't anticipate that. And so, there's likely in street right-of-ways that 15 to 20% of some of those cost recoveries won't get recovered because of some of those things that you start in a master planning stage and then ultimately you see what happens in reality.
Sure.
But I know you've asked for a presentation on that. Mike and I talked about that the other day, and we'd be more than happy to come and have just a very good general discussion about cost recoveries.
Sure, and I'm sure you struggle with it as well. I just always struggle with when you talk, ratepayers have got tens of millions of dollars of investment in the ground that's essentially idle and hasn't been hooked up to yet, about making huge investments. But obviously it's not that simple. There's developers, they own land, farmland on the west side, they don't own the land on the east side. It's not as simple as just go over here and develop. Many people, a lot of that land is encumbered or owned and the people have no interest in selling it. I get that, but so it's kind of a tough one.
And that's the strategy why when we deliver those projects, that particular one, the east side cost recovery, I believe is on a 20-year debt repayment schedule, so that also it's leveraged dollars on very low interest from the state, and then ultimately has a very minimal impact on our customers' rates.
One more, and then I'll see if anybody does. You said something about Basin 15 and 11 years. What was the 11-year reference?
Okay, so just recently we're looking at that we've got about 10 years of supply of land that's positioned for development and or can be with minor extensions. And then in 2021, we have budgeted in our capital plan to open up Basin 15, which adds another year to that 10-year supply in general. And so that's how that's how we look at that we have with our current available land and opening up Basin 15 to what we know some of the constraints are. That would extend today to 11 years of supply. Okay.
Okay, Councilor Erickson.
That's what I was going to piggyback on, as we've had conversations about temporary lift stations to bide the time until 2021 when they're done, that we can do those temporary lift stations to slowly open up some of the development along the way until we're able to, and that will take some pressure off the system as well.
That's right.
So, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions then for the director?
Just two.
Councilor Selberg?
I don't have any more questions. I was just going to see if you remembered me.
That's good.
Not after this, I won't. Okay, now that what's his name is done, Councilor Neitzer.
Last couple questions. So on the in residential developments, I guess I don't know what you would call them. They're not the trunk lines, but the ones just running down my street.
Branch lines.
Branch lines. Okay, so. Both on the private side, on my house side, and then in the public side, what material are those pipes, and what is the life expectancy of those?
All the new subdivisions are PVC.
Yeah, let's talk new, because obviously there might be old iron.
Right.
But let's talk today if I build a house.
Right. Now all the new subdivisions are going in with PVC collection mains, and then if it's more than a 10-inch pipe, we're even lining the manholes to try to protect those manholes long term. Your service line is likely a 4-inch service line. That's PVC as well. PVC really got adopted in the 80s. I think everybody expects it's going to be a greater than 100-year life. Ryan, any perspective? So I would say, solidly 100 years with, adequate maintenance. The one thing that's unique to the wastewater system is, unlike the water system, is you can actually go into a sanitary sewer pipe if you have an upset condition, if there's root intrusion, if there's a sag, if there's grease, and you can correct a lot of those things without excavating. And so it's a unique system. Paul Ferris and his team, they have a goal of getting through the entire system every year, or every 3 years. And so they set their own crews on production targets that they can ultimately get through the entire system every 3 years, and then they've got hot spots where they know they've got grease or sags or some of those things to provide good, reliable service. But PVC, if it's installed well, should last. Ryan said it, 100 years.
Wow, it's amazing that something that caustic it would they would hold up.
That's right.
So the last question, do you have a ballpark on the cost of this Phase 1 project in total?
I do. We've got some conceptual amounts. One of the things you'll see, the master plan's very large. It's probably just short of 1,700 pages. When you look at the plan and the ultimate appendixes, when you look at Phase 1A and Phase 1, what we call in today's dollars, as we prioritize those projects, we're probably looking at about $125 million. So really over the course of the next 10 years, that's going to be our focus. And remember, in the last 10 years, we spent about $131 million and have, I'd say, right-sized the fund to be positioned to do this. And then today we pay off almost $10 million in debt a year, and ultimately that number will go up. So that's why when we talk about conceptual customer rates, that number may sound large, but all these assets they're large, they're caustic. When you look at the actual master plan, you're going to see larger numbers in that because it may be for the additional liquid treatment. It's in there as fully funded, but we intend to do things in staged approach. Okay, but Phase 1 right now in today's dollars is about $125 million.
So I would conclude with saying that I think an audit is a good thing. When you're talking about tens of millions of dollars of citizen dollars, that's a good thing. So I'm good with that. I would the only thing other that I would point out is that when we see the amount in the enterprise fund at any given time, maybe you see $20 or $30 million. Looks like a lot of money, but when you're literally spending tens of millions of dollars,
Right.
each year, and you might have an $18 million, thing coming down the line in 6 months, that could dwindle very quickly. So
Absolutely.
that's why you have to have such a large amount. So
That's right. Okay. This annual fund is about $35 million. So,
Okay, thank you. And Director, thank you. I mean, a lot of good information, and thank you to your staff, too, and to everybody for watching over our system, because we don't know how valuable it is until it's not functioning the way it's supposed to function. None of us want to go back to our 2010 days, I don't think. So it's constant maintenance. A lot of good information. I mean, geez, 16,000 toilets rebated and 17,000 washers and almost 16,000 manhole covers or manholes in the city. Maybe when you come back to us again, you can devise your own Trivial Pursuit game with all this trivia, and it could be called, you know where I'm going?
Right.
Trivia Pursuit.
Right,
So,
I can imagine.
Anyway, it was a good presentation, and I think it is valuable to have you come back again. Maybe at some point, once we have a new council, a new mayor seated as well, too.
That sounds very good. Thanks for your time. We have a very talented team that's committed to doing what they do every day, and have really harnessed a good consulting team to advise us on what those next steps are. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next item is another election update by our city clerk, Tom Greco. And Tom, the fact that you're following up a wastewater presentation, please do not view that as a reflection on the work that you perform. We very much appreciate you and everything that you do for us.
It is tough to follow wastewater. My name is Tom Greco. I am the city clerk, and I'm going to talk about the election. Key thing is, 2 weeks from today, people will be at the polls casting their ballots. We want to make sure that we get the word out and inform people of what's going on. I'll talk about how we're going to do that over the next couple slides here. Okay, this is what I'll cover today. Talk about what we're doing over the next 2 weeks, because there are some big things that we have going on in the office, and of course with the people that we work with, our partners, to pull the election off. And also we can't forget those 250 election workers out there. While they get paid a small stipend each day for the election, they are essentially volunteers, so they're a critical part of this process. We'll talk also about information for voters. I've given you that information before, and this is just a follow-up to kind of drive that point home. I'm okay. Okay, so over the next 2 weeks, key thing is that in-person absentee voting is still going on at the Minnehaha County Auditor's Office. It's very easy. We've already had a couple people show up for that. We've mailed out 325 or so absentee ballots that have already been requested by mail. So people are, obviously interested. They know what's going on, and we expect to see those numbers continue each and every day. We're also right now going through election schools. So we have 8 planned election schools. They're each an hour and a half. We started yesterday, one at 3:30, one at 6:30 p.m. We'll do that again Wednesday. We'll do it Thursday, and then just a 3:31 on Friday with a makeup next Friday. This is required by law. We provide it to all of our workers. Some sessions are busier than others, but it's a great opportunity to re-energize people about the election process. Most of them have done it before, and it just kind of reacquaints them with those laws, those rules and regulations that are essential for running the election. So Tamara and I are both teaching that. The other thing that we'll be doing next Thursday at 1:30 p.m. down at our counting center, which I'll talk about in a moment, is a public test of our tabulating machines. Those are the DS850s. We have 3 of them. They're great processors for the ballots that we receive on election night, and that is what counts our ballots and produces our results. So we do that public test by statute. We'll be doing it at 1:30 next Thursday. The other thing that'll be going on next Thursday, deadline for campaign finance disclosure reports by 5 p.m. This is the one that will be through Monday, this upcoming Monday, and it will be due no later, like I said, on Thursday the 5th by 5 p.m. The other thing that we'll be doing next week, and this is kind of a monumental effort because we're delivering to 56 locations, or correction, 55 locations. We have all of our equipment, voting booths. We have our ballot marking devices, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the other equipment, ballots and ballot boxes, all the equipment that the precinct workers need to run their precinct on election day. We rely on our street department to deliver those items. We've been working with them. They'll have 4 teams working in 4 parts of the city next Thursday, Friday, and Monday to get all this stuff out to the polling places. They'll turn around on Wednesday and pick it all up and most likely get ready to do it again the Thursday preceding the runoff election. So a lot of coordination there, and obviously a lot of material that's getting moved around for the election. One of the other things that I want to let you know about is, in addition to using social media, we've been developing PSAs. I've taken advantage of any time the media has wanted to talk to me about what's going on with the election, the process, and how to get information. I've availed myself. We'll also be sending out, and I've mentioned this before, postcards to select precincts throughout the city. Everybody got their water bill, who gets a hard copy water bill. We'll be sending those out, number one, to those 6 precincts that were involved in redistricting. We'll identify their new district, and we'll remind them of their polling place. There are those 4 locations that are new polling locations, so we'll send a reminder to them. One other group that we're sending is up in the Northeast District. We had some changes in boundaries, so we're sending it to what amounts to Precinct 47, and we'll remind them what their polling place is. The other thing, and it also includes a changed polling location, is with the construction on Ellis Road. The Sanford Wellness Center is a new polling location, which is located in the Northwest District, 1 precinct up for a Southwest precinct. So people have to drive out of their precinct to the Sanford Wellness Center to cast their ballots on Election Day. I've been working with the project manager from Public Works and talking to their contractor. We've developed a sign plan so that on Election Day, the folks that are driving or need to drive to Sanford, there'll be detour signs for Sanford, but it will also say Precinct 1-17 polling place. They'll also put some of those portable billboards out that kind of flash different messages on. But we'll identify on the postcard that they are going to have construction there, follow the detour signs, and also just let them know about in-person absentee voting because they may want to take advantage of that. Okay, checking registration. So the deadline for the April 10th election has passed, but if you know that you're still not registered, please go and register because then you'll be good to go for the runoff election and certainly future elections. There are 2 ways to do this. There are 2 ways to check your registration very easily, and both of those can be accessed through our webpage, www.siouxfalls.org/election. One is by check, and these are essentially the same applications, just a different platform. The South Dakota Secretary of State Voter Information Portal is desktop-based. You type in your first name, last name, and your date of birth, and it'll show you where your polling location is. If you're a qualified voter in the city, it'll also give you your specific ballot, and also you press a button and it'll give you directions to your polling location. So it's a great resource, a great tool. If you find that you're not in there or you're at the wrong address in it, you could always update that with your auditor. The Vote 605 mobile app is just easier to remember. You could access it through your mobile device, whether it's an Android or an Apple. And that too, you could just put your first name, last name, and in this case, your zip code or your birth date, and it pulls up the same information. So a lot of great information out there for people to access at their fingertips, especially for Election Day, because all the precincts, all the voters are aligned with obviously a polling place. They could pull that up and get to their polling place pretty easily. Just a reminder, requesting mail-in absentee ballots, you continue to do that through your county auditor, be it Lincoln or Minnehaha. However, if you want to in-person absentee vote, and we've had a couple hundred people over the last 2 days, we started yesterday at 8 a.m., take advantage of that down at the Minnehaha County Auditor's Office. It's a fairly easy process. The lines aren't long. As a matter of fact, there's very seldom lines, at least the times I've been in there, but we hope they get long, I guess. And it's a great opportunity, if you can't make it on April 10th, to get out and cast your vote in-person absentee. And then the other thing that I just want to drive home is to know your polling location. So check out those applications, call our office, look at your water bill insert, make sure you know where your polling location is on Election Day. And we'll be putting more information out about that over the next couple weeks. Okay, new to elections. There are basically two new things, but two items that relate to one system. In the past, we've used what's called an auto-mark ballot marking device. And basically what that is, if you've seen it, it's an assistive voting device for people who can't otherwise vote on the paper ballot. So what it does in essence, that and this new Express Vote, it has a touch screen, it has a set of headphones that you can listen to the ballot. It uses Braille to be able to follow the instructions on how to mark your ballot, and it also has an insert for a sip and puff device, which people could insert it if they have one to be able to vote that way. This, again, is generally for disabled people who can't otherwise vote a paper ballot. However, by law, you can always bring someone in to assist you if you need that type of assistance. But it's a great device. This Express Vote was recently fielded. It weighs about a quarter of the weight of the AutoMark, so it's easier to get out to the polling locations. There has been a learning curve with our election workers so far, and certainly with us when it comes to programming the machines and getting them ready for use. But the interface, what voters will see, especially those who've used them before, the AutoMark in the past, they'll see essentially the same product. So we think it's a big win in that respect. It works a little quicker than the AutoMark. And so I think it's going to be a great thing to have. Now, the thing that you may hear about or see, the one thing that is significantly different other than the size and the actual look of it, it uses a different type of ballot. It uses a 4.5-inch wide ballot, which is, an example's up there, so it's half the width of a regular ballot. It's still 14 inches long. That may take folks some getting used to, but you have polling place workers at each precinct who could assist people with that process. In the past, the AutoMark would take a regular ballot that you or I would get if we hand-marked it. You would insert it, and then the AutoMark would simply fill in the bubbles for you based on your choices. This, you still make your selections, and the card that it prints out are simply your choices that you made. So it's not, it doesn't look like your regular ballot, but it's still an official ballot, and it's a ballot, most importantly, that could be counted by our tabulating machines, which we've done already with test ballots. So it's new. It's not a huge game changer for folks that are out there who use it. It has created a learning curve for us, particularly in my office and with the auditor's office, but I think we've overcome that. There'll be some challenges if we have a runoff election given the time period, and right now I am preparing to use it for the runoff election. I think we can do it. I've been working with our vendor to make sure that we get our programming and we could get all our ballots in time. So more to follow on that if needed, but I think it's a great tool that will be out there at the polling places. The workers will like it because it's lighter, They may not like it because it may take some time the first morning they actually set it up. But I think after one try, they'll be pretty good at it. So that's a great thing that we have added to the election. The other thing is the counting center. So you may have heard that we've moved our counting center across the street. It's between the old courthouse museum and the administration building. It's been moved there for a variety of reasons, but I'm confident that Auditor Litz has come up with a pretty good plan for the flow of people and ballots and everything else on election night. It'll still be open. You can view from a kind of a vestibule area, a lobby. You can see the counting process going on, and I think it's going to work out well for us. We've really been emphasizing this with our workers because it's important, obviously, that they get their stuff to the counting center on election night. Normally, they would just bring it to the front, the Minnesota Avenue side of the administration building. Now they have a couple more turns to make, but we'll still be prepared like we have been in the past with, we'll have some Boy Scouts on hand to help them carry those heavy ballot boxes in, and we'll get the counting process moving as quickly as we can. So with that, I'll end there and just leave with a word that I will come back next week just for a quick staff update to let you know where we are, and also just briefly talk about the runoff. But I do anticipate coming back and talking in detail about the runoff the day after the election. As you may recall, our meetings got moved from Tuesday to Wednesday, so I'll be back for sure on the 11th. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Councilor Neisert?
I think you said it was precinct 117,
Yeah.
the new one. Was there nowhere available in that precinct that met your requirements for handicapped accessibility? Is that why we're at Sanford?
We went looking around, and so we were in our pedigree for that particular precinct, and we literally drove around, and it's predominantly residential. There may have been one or two apartment complexes that we could have looked at, but given the accessibility to those, not from an ADA standpoint, but just being able to find it, we found that going with the Sanford Wellness Center, number one, they were willing to do it, and number two, they've got a pretty good setup there for actually conducting the voting. So we have a handful of polling places throughout the city that are not physically in your precinct boundary, and this is one of those.
Okay. Yeah, obviously, as you know, it's not optimal, but hopefully you can have as much signage as possible to get people to run around Lancaster, to go around 26th and Mary Beth, or
detour them.
make sure you get them there. Are you confident that with the express votes that you're going to be able to, because I do understand the technology, I have seen it, that after the first election you're going to be able to get the memory sticks to the vendor, get them reprogrammed, get everything sent back and get it done and have it all and reprogram all the machines and get it pulled off?
At this point I am. I've been talking to the vendor about the turnaround time, going through the ballot proof process, the ordering process, and it looks like it will be tight, but it can happen. And just so you all know, each one of those machines up there uses basically a programming stick. The machine doesn't store any voter data, any choices, any things like that. Basically, all it does is store the ballot in electronic format. And what we'll need to do, basically, if we do have a runoff, and I'll assume that we will, election night, I'll come back here, I'll order our next round of ballots, and that takes some work. Just if we have two races. And then what we need to do next is pull a thumb drive out of each one of these ballot marking devices and get those FedExed out to our vendor the next day. And then simultaneously, we'll go through building the ballot proofs inside Total Vote. The county does that for me because I can't use Total Vote in that capacity. And then we'll start working back and forth with our vendor to get the ballots finalized, and they go to the printing plant.
Okay. Councilor Staley?
Well, first of all, Tom, we'll say a special prayer for you. It sounds like you
Yeah, I think I
need a
picked something up.
little help there, yeah. But thanks for hanging in there. First of all, thank you for the water bill insert, because I think that really helps people to have it right in front of them to know where their precincts are. Secondly, I will say I've been a superintendent several times for these elections, and that auto mark machine was scary. That it was heavy, and we always had kind of an uncertainty about how to get that thing to work. So I'm glad they're updating that. And then I did talk with Bob Litz as well, and he's really excited about having that counting center over there because he was going to get shoved into the hallway otherwise. And
Yeah, I think it'll work out well. And the new machine, the Express Vote, can be carried on your shoulder. So a change this time is that we'll have the precinct workers. We've asked them to bring it back because we had that turnaround time with the reprogramming. But a lot of good stuff.
Councilor Erickson?
Thank you. Just going off of Councilor Neitzer's questions, what if there's a recount? Or do we have any, do we have to keep a copy of any of it?
We keep all the paper ballots. We keep a copy of the election itself, the programming for it. But what I found after some research and discussing it last week, the recount rules do not apply for any race where there would be with a runoff provision. So the recount rules would not apply if there was, the criteria are if you're within 5 votes or within 2%, or if you have a bona fide tie, then you can request a recount. And that has to be done within a certain amount of time from the canvass of official votes. However, the way the law reads, and I have it here, is that it would not apply to any race that has a runoff provision.
So if I may follow up. So between, I mean, obviously, if you have 5 candidates running or in one or 6 in the other, clearly number 1 and number 2 have some differences. But what if 2 and 3 are within 2% or 5 votes? That's where, I mean, if you land in 5 or 6, obviously you're probably not going to get up to number 2, but my question is in regards to that 2 and 3 spot.
So the way, and I could get clarification, but I think it's pretty clear in here, the way the law reads, Chapter 1221, which is about recounts, we do have a special provision within Chapter 9-13, which is municipal elections. There is a provision that identifies the need for a recount. However, there are 2 important parts in this 1221. And a lot of it is applicable. A lot of it is predominantly applicable to races other than municipal. But there are 2 key paragraphs in it. One is application of the chapter, and it says, except in school and municipal elections, and as provided in 12-21-18, the provisions of this chapter apply to the recount of ballots cast in any election conducted. The provisions of 12-21-47 to 12-21-61 inclusive apply to all elections. So except in school and municipal elections and as provided in 12-21-18. 12-21-18 says that the chapter, which is applicable to school and municipal elections, the chapter is not applicable where a runoff election is required. The provisions of this chapter shall not apply to any election which must be followed by a second or runoff election by reason of no majority choice, according to the official returns.
Interesting.
And I'm still working through that, but it has come up, and we could explore it, but it seems to make sense because the law also says that you'll conduct a runoff election. You shall in 3 weeks from the regular election.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Tom. Now, 2 years ago, I remember in the election, there was some glitch somewhere where it took about an hour or 2 delay in counting votes, or I don't remember what it was, but I remember being a part of it, and it was added to all the fun. So what do you do when something like that happens to, like, has there been a test in the meantime that, I mean, again, maybe you can tell me exactly what happened, I can't remember, but do you then, like I see you have a tabulation machine testing. Was that done before that election, or is that a result of something that happened? I mean, I'd imagine you're always kind of formulating tests and machines.
It was done before. So in 2016, there were 2 issues. Number one, the absentees weren't processed in time. They were still going through and processing absentees past 7 p.m. We fixed that this year a variety of ways, the least of which is starting earlier. Opposed to 2 o'clock, we're starting at 9:30. And we'll have a better trained absentee board. We'll have 3 absentee boards. We had 1 last time. The second thing that's important is There was an issue, so one thing that is not necessarily a part of the test, but it will be this time, there was simply an issue taking the thumb drives from the DS850s, inserting them into the person's computer who has the program to read it. It was a formatting issue with those. He overcame it that same night, but it ended up, it took a couple tries to get it figured out.
So is that something where, when you're doing all the pre-work, this time we've tested, make sure we're, that's what I'm asking. You're always kind of fine-tuning the...
From start to finish, we do all 66 precincts, and we pull all the results in like we would on election night, download them, and make sure everything matches. Mm-hmm. And again, just like in 2016, we rely on the county, because by agreement, they conduct our tabulation, to help us get through all those things.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Councilor Neitzer.
Totally just curious, do you have any idea, because as an example, when you watch the national races and they're doing all of their whatever, they're talking about, all the, we've got most of the precincts in Cincinnati, and therefore we only have outstate, blah, 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 and then people are making predictions. Do you know if there's any pattern as to which precincts show up first, if it's purely whichever's closest geographically, or it's all over the map? Or
what I saw last time, it was the ones that are closer to right here, and then they kind of trickle in from the further away you get.
So would the southern regions be later, perhaps, and the northern?
I don't want to say right now they will be, because maybe they'll be.
Well, okay, maybe not predicting the future, but I mean what you've seen in the past, I guess.
It's generally the people that are closer will get there quicker, but then there are other factors. There's the election board itself, and they may be a little slower, and that's fine, because we want to make sure that they get all their stuff right before they pack everything up and come back to the counting center. And we generally count as they come in, but ballot boxes could get stacked up, and we'll just start pulling what we have there.
And you just take them as they come?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Tom. I firmly believe that we have the right person, the right persons in position for this. It is a huge undertaking, and it is hard to believe that we're just 2 weeks out from our next election. So,
all right, thank you.
Good job, and let's hope that Murphy stays home that night. In terms of the Murphy's
Law. Actually, we do have a Murphy who will be working that night.
Yeah, well, that Murphy should come.
All right, thank you.
All right. This meeting is adjourned.